Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned when we die that we, we take something with us, and one of the Beatles songs is the love you take equals the love that you make. What is it?
They weren't terribly well known for their mathematics, so.
What exactly is it that we take and bring back?
Well, I mean, the Buddhist thinking on it is that although there's no self, there's a kind of a continuum, like water in a river, so to speak. And although the water is always changing, if you grab a bucket of water at any specific point, that water has a particular composition. And the Buddhists think of your being as having three sheaths, three dimensions, if you will. On a very deep level, it's the pure nature, which goes lifetime to lifetime, and the clear light mind, and the most subtle level of energy, Chitro Mandala. And on top of that, there's kind of the more long-term instincts gathered and placed on the continuum over the passage of time and lifetimes. And on top of that, the more recent. So thinking is something like that. And so at the time of the death, when all of the energies in our life passes, and as the energies withdraw into the subtle energies, and the subtle into the heart chakra and so on, and those dissolve, basically it's a kind of a distilled essence of energy. And in the Buddhist Abhidharma, as well as in Tibetan Bardo literature that's based on that, then when we leave the body, we carry with us kind of karmic energies combined with memories of this lifetime. Everything boils down to memories. And as we go into the Bardo, we emerge with a Bardo body similar to the body in appearance to the body of this life. Just like in dreams, we usually dream of ourselves looking like we look now. We don't usually dream of how we looked other forms. And halfway through the Bardo, it slowly starts to change as we start to unwind towards the next lifetime. And slowly the appearance of what we will become in that next life becomes what we see in the Bardo dream, if you will. It's something like that kind of an idea. So the Sanskrit word for what goes on in Tibet, the Sanskrit word is Santana, like Carlos Santana. Same spelling, S-A-N-T-A-N-A. But it just means stream or flow. In Tibetan it's gyut. And that stream or flow having those three dimensions, if you will. Therefore, it's thought to be very important that on the day-by-day basis we completely clarify our life. Otherwise, we have to do all of that at once after we pass away, after we die. That's all undigested and sort of churning around in the belly of our soul. And we get indigestion. But if we can keep our life clear on a day-by-day level, breath by breath, day by day, then, as the seventh Dalai Lama puts it, at the time of death we can greet the clear light of death like meeting up with an old friend. So that's basically the idea behind many of the Buddhist practices and experiences. Now, the Tantric tradition claims that this isn't a kind of a belief system, but rather that you can cultivate it as actual experience. And you can do that in two ways. One is by Kundalini practice or Chandali practice, sometimes termed illusory body practice, during the daytime in meditation and then yoga. And the other is by cultivating power to be aware in the dream state. So in those two ways we can experience the reality of death while awake. And that's basically, I think, what we'll look at this afternoon is those two things once we get started. Does anyone want to bring anything else up? Yeah.
A spin off of what you just finished talking about, what is actually the cohesive, like in Yoga Sutras they talk about the ahamkara, the I maker.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the remaining, so if we let go of a sense of who we are as a body being, transition, that stream, what holds it to any particular quote, entity, or since there's no soul in Buddhism. So what is there, even in saying that we have a anything as opposed to a nothing, a sunyata, what is it holds us to those?
Well,
just the karma? Is that the
all right.
essence of karma?
We can only say no soul if we translate soul in a particular way. I mean, it is a problem in translation, what we use for what. So I often use the word soul, and the Dalai Lama also often uses the word soul in Buddhism, just because a lot of the early translations took non-self to mean non-soul. It's not that clear, even in Christian philosophy, what they mean by soul. So when we say not something, it's not necessarily referring to something that the Christians are using in a positive sense. So what is there is something called santana. And santana means this flow or energy. What keeps the water of a river together is kind of its continuum, its momentum. So at the time a drop of water goes from the river to the ocean and becomes part of the vast ocean, then until it's in the ocean as part of a little unit that's in motion, but in the ocean it becomes part of the vast ocean. So I guess you could say what keeps it together until that time is the sense of self that arises from the elements of the continuity of experience. Like, why is this little hair on my body think it's part of Glenn? I mean, when I shave it off, is it going, Glenn, goodbye, Glenn? You know, or when we go pee-pee, is the pee-pee going down saying, Glenn, goodbye, I'm going to miss you. Is that, you know, what keeps anything together? It's the momentum of its continuity. And in this sense, that momentum being the official definition of it in Buddhist dialectics is the sense of self arising from the 4 or 5 parts of parts or facets of being. So even though that thing isn't separate, it has a sense of separateness. Like, I think I'm a banker and therefore I have a sense of me, the banker. Or I think I'm a musician, so I have a sense of me, the musician, and so on and so forth. And me, the banker, or me, the musician, is a very small part of what I really am. So Jeffrey Hopkins, in one of his earlier writings, tried to take it the other way. Instead of emptiness as nothingness, emptiness as everythingness. What does a soul become? It becomes not this, not that, but rather becomes everything. So when the drop of water hits the ocean, what happens? The Tibetan expression is Tamshi Kembe Yeshe, omniscient wisdom. Because now the mind identifies with everything equally, all things become part of self, or are included in the sense of self. Perhaps that would be literally means omniscient awareness, awareness which incorporates everything, something like that. So until enlightenment, we're this or we're that. In enlightenment, we become everything. Something along those lines.
So the loss of separation.
The evaporation of the illusion of duality. Yeah. And until then, as karma meaning here momentum, the momentum of what it is thrown together in the bucket at one moment, combined with identification with that. Me the banker, me the this, me the that. So this afternoon I wanted to look a little bit at the Tantra side. And we've, those of you who've come to workshops with me before with the 6 yogas, we see it discussed in quite a lot of detail in the 6 yogas of Naropa and the 6 yogas of Niguma and so forth. But the idea is that we have an experience of similar to death in many different natural phenomena. But the most important from the point of view of personal practice and personal development is sleep. When we go to sleep, it's very similar to dying. And when we enter this, the clear light of the moment of sleep is very similar to the clear light of the moment of death. And when we come out of the clear light of the moment of going to sleep, or we come out with a dream body in the same way after death, when we come out of the moment of death, clear light of the moment of death, we come out with a Bardo body. Now we can cultivate by means of deep meditation and yoga in which the body is, the normal functions of the body are somewhat suspended. We can cultivate something of an inkling, if you will, of that experience in our meditation. And when we do it in our meditation, we do it with our awareness fully activated. And so therefore, when we try the same thing at the moment of going to sleep, we're a little more competent with it. And if we can succeed at it while going to sleep and in the sleep dream state, then that same skill will be relevant at the time of death. And the idea is very simple, that when we do tantric meditation, we essentially sedate bodily processes. I think in the Ashtanga yoga system of Patanjali in India, who of course is much later than the Buddha, so steals this from us Buddhists. I often have to throw that in just in case, because a lot of Indians think that later Buddhists borrowed it from Patanjali. But as we say in hockey, the best defense is a good offense. So this, in the Patanjali yoga system, goes together as pranayama, and then the breathing exercises, and then as sense withdrawal and energy withdrawal. So when we do it in the 6 yogas, essentially what we do is do our practice of meditation and yoga, doing the breathing, the vase breathing, the same as Patanjali's pranayama. And when we develop that, or we mature that meditation, then we have an experience of sense withdrawal and energy withdrawal. And what we talk about here is that first the earth element relaxes and withdraws. When that happens, we lose a sense of strength in our arms and strength in our legs. And secondly, the water element dissolves. That means our blood flow, our heartbeat slow down. And thirdly, the fire element dissolves. That means our metabolism slows. And fourthly, the air element dissolves. And that means essentially that the breath takes a different pattern. We start breathing very differently than we normally breathe. And after those elements have dissolved, then the sort of aggressive or male energies of the body relax or withdraw. And here the idea is that our body is made from 50% from materials inherited from our male ancestors and 50% from materials inherited from our female ancestors. So when the male energies withdraw, all of our kind of aggressive instincts relax. And the way it's explained in Tantra literatures, there's kind of a flash of white light, like moonlight. And then the female energies withdraw. And rather than aggression, which means pushing away or even destroying, the female are connected to incorporating, caring about, or even cherishing. So those withdraw, and there's a flash of red light, like sunset. These are called the dissolution of the three conceptual aspects of consciousness, all of which are associated with a sense of self. If I think Glenn, what can piss off Glenn? Those dissolve. Whatever can piss off Glenn dissolves. And those male energies all dissolve. And then for the female energies, what does Glenn like or attach to or depend upon for his sense of self? You know, what things that Glenn likes or is addicted to or needs that he depends on for a sense of self. And those dissolve. And thirdly, is kind of the formless dimension of things. What is it that Glenn doesn't care about at all? To depend upon sense of self, or kind of just the spaciousness of being. Those aspects of the conceptual mind dissolve. I forget the exact number they list in the Abhidharma literature. It's like 33, 40, and 7 or something like that. There's 33 associated with one of them, and 40 ways of talking about another one, and 7 about the third one. Yes, sorry?
Where do those numbers come from? When you look at that, you're like,
I think Buddha invented them on a drunken Friday afternoon.
like hidden numerology in that or something? 33 for the white, 40 for the red. And stuff.
Yeah, they're called the 80 conceptual mind factors.
Would the third one be associated with the lack of color, with black?
And then, yeah, when the ones associated with so-called space or sort of male-female imbalance, neither male nor female, nothing male nor female. Sort of ones, I don't know, eunuch quality of one's being, one's gender-free quality, that one essentially there ends up. Those dissolve. And when those dissolve, it's said that we have a sense of passing out or faint, because most people can't identify with being without having a sense of self. So when you lose the sense of all of the 80 conceptual mind factors, you kind of have a sense of just infinity. But until one's meditations are deeper, that sense of infinity is inaccessible to the conscious mind. In other words, we can't be aware of something and aware of nothing. We need an object to have awareness. So we need something we're feeling aggressive about or something we're feeling attached to be conscious, to have a sense of being. So in the Tantric Yogas, we aim during the day to induce that state of elemental withdrawal. The language goes something like that. And by doing it as a daily practice, when we go to sleep at night, we're supposed to lie down, and as we lie down, we should try to notice how we're going to sleep. Like first we notice when we get to the stage that lifting the arms and legs are hard. Like you try to lift your arms and legs, it's like, oh boy, they're heavy. Now, the indication is at that point one's earth energies have dissolved to that level. And then again observe as you enter slowly into the sleep state. So it means trying to go to sleep as though you were meditating, as though you were observing the process objectively from a distance. And then as you go deeper and become more sleepy, the water element dissolves and your heartbeat drops, slows down. And the traditional texts talk about kind of inner signs that happen that you watch in your meditation. You're watching your observance, flickering fireflies and like a butter lamp and things like the mirage or smoke, like smoky kind of in the air kind of things. And then the fire element dissolves, and you notice you feel a little cool as you're falling asleep. And then the air element dissolves, and at that time you go and fall asleep. And then as those three levels of conceptual mind dissolve, there's that experience of the white moon-like, milk-like light and the red sunset-like, sun-like light. And then the flash or falling into darkness. And the flash of the clear light of sleep. And just how we had it during the day in tantric meditation, now we have it naturally at night. But by combining our meditation with the natural process, it's much more clear and much more powerful. And then we stay in that clear light of the moment of sleep as long as we can. That said, fully accomplished yogis can just rest in the clear light of sleep for extended periods of time, sometimes hours and so on. And when we achieve enlightenment, of course, we're there all the time. Enlightenment means the clear light of consciousness is always present in a fully realized way, something like that. For that reason, the literature talks about mother clear light and child clear light. And the mother clear light being the one that's always with us, but we don't notice. And the child clear light being as much of it as we can actually access in our meditation and in our spiritual practice.
You said the clear light of consciousness is always present in a what kind of way?
The clear light of consciousness is always the basis of our experience, but unless we develop a subtle level of awareness, we don't ever notice it. And so it's called the mother, because just like the mother produces everything, yet we don't necessarily notice it. Mothers always like it when you use the word mother in a time of talk. And then when we go into the sleep state, it's just like going into the Bardo. When you come out of the clear light of the moment of sleep, the elements start to reconstruct themselves in reverse, exactly in reverse to what had happened coming into them. Coming into them, the most coarse dissolved into the more subtle, into the more subtle, into the more subtle, into the more subtle, and coming out of them, we go from the most subtle, the clear light, into the dark swoon, and then into the radiant redness as our things I care about sense of self arise. And then the moonlight, things I don't like and that irritate me, arise. And that stimulates the air element, which stimulates the fire element, which stimulates the water element, which stimulates the earth element. And plung, we see ourselves in a dream with a dream body. And the dream body having all the qualities of a waking body with many extras thrown in. And similarly, at the time of death, that same thing happens in reverse. Clear light of the moment of sleep, a moment of death, until we come out of that with a Bardo body. So during the daytime practice in Tantra, the emphasis is on how to become familiar with that process, so that when we do it in sleep, we can go to sleep and in the sleep state have a completely present awareness that is fully present in each moment of the sleep and of the dream. Each moment of the sleep and dream is said to be very powerful for meditation, in that it's said that meditating for a day in dream state is equivalent to 100 years in waking state. Also, the dream body has many extraordinary qualities like clairvoyance and ability to fly and walk through matter and walk on water and all of these qualities. And so we can use that dream body to accomplish many extraordinary spiritual qualities. Most important from point of view of death and dying, or dying and death as the Dalai Lama likes to put it, is that by going to sleep every day like that, we meditate on our own death and passing and become familiar with the dream body and the dream state, the dream terrain. And that's the best way to become familiar with the after-death state and the after-death terrain. Now, if we achieve enlightenment in this lifetime, by means of our practice, of course we fully experience that before we die, and so therefore, like the seventh Dalai Lama put it, then when the moment you die and the clear light of death arises, it's like throwing your arms around an old friend who's coming to your house for a visit. There's no lack of familiarity. If we can do the daytime practice perfectly, then it said we can experience the death state equal to the actual dying. So it's then it's not a matter of believing death is like this, or this happens after death, or whatever happens. Or the mystery is unveiled. The quality of that experience, or the nature of that experience, is fully realized or fully perceived. But it's quite difficult to accomplish it merely in the waking state through the tantric yogas, and therefore the time of sleep and dream is considered to be especially valuable for it. The Tibetan Book of the Dead puts the whole thing in kind of a metaphoric basis. If we look at any highest yoga tantra mandala, and many of you here practice some highest yoga tantra exercises, sadhanas and so forth, then most highest yoga tantra sadhanas are put in 3 phases. One is called taking the clear light of the moment of death as the nature of dharmakaya, of enlightenment. And secondly is taking the bardo that follows death as the sambhogakaya of enlightenment. And thirdly is taking the arising as a deity in the mandala as the nirmanakaya of enlightenment. So reality body, beatific body, and emanation body. So the daily practice of every sadhana in highest yoga tantra has those 3 phases. It's really talking about how we can go to sleep at night into the clear light, how our dream body can become, we can see the beatific element of enlightenment in it, and how rising out of sleep is like a rebirth. Again, it's often said that for that reason, every time you do your tantric sadhana, you get the merit of a complete lifetime, and that doing it 4 times a day becomes like 4 lifetimes. Because 4 times in that, 4 times in your daily cycle, you go into clear light, you go into sambhogakaya, bardo, and you go into nirmanakaya, rebirth. So the highest yoga tantra, if we look at the Bardo Todol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is kind of a classic in Western literature now. I think it's become more popular in Tibet from the time it was published in English translation than it ever was in the 500-year history that it existed in Tibet. I think in its 500-year history in Tibet, it was a not really a well-known book. But after it was published in the West, and every Westerner going to a Tibetan Lama would say, "Hey, what about the Bardo Todol, the Tibetan book?" And what? And then he sort of looked into it. Oh, yes. So it sort of brought a second life to a 500-year-old classic. So now every Tibetan Lama knows what is the Bardo Todol. Otherwise, in the olden days, basically every school has their own kind of book called Bardo Mutra, which means welcome to the Bardo. Something Mutra means like introduction or pointing out, but it has a sense of welcome. And so the Tibetan Book of the Dead, as translated, is one book in one school, and within that school there's many different traditions, and it's one of the traditions within that one school. So the idea here is in our daily practice, we do the generation stage sadhana, where we meditate on going into clear light, coming out as a Bardo, but seeing the Bardo body as a Sambhogakaya of a Buddha, and then coming out of that as the fully accomplished deity, being the Nirmanakaya aspect of a Buddha. And in a way, that's rehearsing our own going to sleep, dreaming, and getting up in the morning. It's also rehearsing our own death and intermediate state and rebirth. If we do it properly, and we combine it with the completion stage, where we do it with the breathing exercises and the elemental dissolutions, and at the time of sleep we learn to recognize those elemental transformations, then it becomes, what's known in Tibetan as a Zogrim practice, becomes a complete practice. The Bardo Todol being a mandala, then it puts all of these processes of the dissolutions coarse into subtle, into subtle, into more subtle, into most subtle, and so forth. And then coming out of the most subtle into slightly more coarse, slightly more coarse, slightly more coarse. It puts it in terms of a particular Tibetan mandala, being the Chitro, the mandala of 100 peaceful and wrathful deities. So it's just talking about the peaceful, really talking about how when the female quality, the going through the activation of those conceptual mindsets associated with the female or caring side of being, how they're activated. And the wrathful, when the male, how they are activated. And so rather than do them in a kind of a general way, they become symbolized by that particular part of the sadhana, that particular part of the mandala. If instead of that you practice a different tantra like a Guhya Samaja or Chakra Samvara, Yamantaka, Hevajra, then the deities are all different and the mandala looks different, but the same meaning is there, the same symbolism is there. That is to say, everything to do with solidity, everything to do with fluidity, everything to do with the temperate or passion side of things, everything to do with motility, and everything to do with the sense of self as an aggressive side and as incorporating side and as a kind of a universal side. How these all rise and fall within our experience. So the Dalai Lama, one of his books, he said, I rehearse my own death 4 times a day. When he said that, what he meant by it was in doing his daily sadhana, his tantric sadhana, that essentially he visualizes that whole process. I think in terms of how we practice it ourselves, if we have tantric initiation, then we can follow whatever is our sadhana and whatever is the guideline in that particular Zogrim or completion stage practice. If we don't do a particular Buddhist practice, if we do a Hindu practice, that same kind of element there is present in the Patanjali yoga system. Again, not every spiritual tradition deals with it directly on every level. It's kind of, to a certain extent, I guess you could say, an esoteric aspect of most traditions. Otherwise, we can simply, if we don't have access to those kind of practices, we can just kind of explore them in our own continuum. That is to say, notice how when your meditation gets deeper, these transformations happen within the body. And as the transformations happen within the body, observe the transformations that take place within consciousness. And similarly, as you go to sleep, watch and record the transformations in the body, and notice how notice the different quality of consciousness that arises with each physical transformation. In the tantric world, it's said consciousness rides upon energy like a person riding a horse. And I think often in the West, people go to sleep, they just throw themselves down on the bed and crash out, and that's kind of the be-all and end-all of sleeping. And if they can't go to sleep, then turn on the telly and put on something very boring and fall asleep, or take a pill, or something like that. But in the tantric idea, our sleep is our very special little window into deeper experience. And it's also a window into the other world of human dimension, if you will. In the practice, it's said that some of the qualities of the sleep body, which are very similar to the Bardo body, one of the most important of those is a kind of a clairvoyance or higher power of the mind. Sort of clairvoyant powers, and also certain kind of mystical powers connected with the physical world. And that these are very important tools for our own enlightenment. Therefore, the great Atisha Dipankara Sri Jnana pointed out that if you can access those powers of clairvoyance and so on, you should make that an imperative in your spiritual practice. It's kind of interesting to see him write that, because in many other books we note this, that if such powers arise in your meditation, don't be distracted by them. But a difference between ordinary Buddhism, or Sutra Buddhism, and Tantric Buddhism is that in Tantric Buddhism we want to cultivate everything we can get and use that, because it's a way of, it's an extension of Mahayana Buddhism, the vow to be of benefit to all living beings. And therefore it's said, the more clairvoyant you are, the more beneficial you are. I often like to point out that I think in the West we kind of think of clairvoyance as something very extraordinary. But actually the Tibetan word for it, ngu she, just means like clarified awareness. Clarified awareness. Of course, clairvoyant in a way is just also has a sense of like clarified seeing. And the idea is that something that all living beings have to some extent. But because in most people it's just kind of a flittering quality that comes and goes, then we don't get much access to it or much practical use of it. But we see with mothers and children very often, if a child has a problem, even if the mother's like hundreds of miles away, and even if the kid's like 60 and she's like 85 or something, the mother still has some kind of feeling for that. Very often. Or you'll think about phoning someone and then you'll get a phone call from that phone, from that person. So in this way, in Buddhism we think of clairvoyance as a very normal thing for people. But it's something that by means of yoga in particular, the yogas that are linked to the training in death and dying, it's a quality of those yogas that we can access or stabilize those factors. And by having them, Atisha says in his book, and this is kind of again, having it for one day is like meditating without them for 100 years, he says in his Lam Dun book. And so therefore he says, try to get them as quickly as you can. And that's in a very general book he wrote for the general populace. It's not like some super esoteric manual. It's just his lamp for the path to enlightenment, which is a kind of became in Tibet the basis of the whole Lamrim tradition, and all schools basically incorporated it as their kind of foundations of their whatever they would do later. So in that way, the training in death and dying is also said to be a kind of a way of cultivating or activating our natural higher sense or more subtle sense of things. So that in a dream state, everything is clearly just energy. So we don't actually get distracted by the physical side of things so much. I mean, we think they're physical, but they are more obviously just energy than they are when we're awake. When we're awake, physical things seem more physical. Like if someone hits you on the head with a stick when you're awake, you get a bruise. But in sleep, if you dream of getting hit with a stick, you don't necessarily get a bruise. Therefore, the sleep and dream state, because it is more subtle energy dimension of things, therefore it's more easy to cultivate those kind of qualities. The idea is something like that. So the teaching on death, dying, impermanence is said to be the first teaching Buddha ever gave, because after his enlightenment, when he wandered for, what was it, 7 weeks, and then he gave his first teaching, it was on the 4 reality factors, commonly referred to as the 4 noble truths. Perhaps we should call them the 4 ignoble truths. Truth of suffering and the truth of cause of suffering and so on. And the truth of suffering being that the nature of an unenlightened life is that everything dies. And when we are unenlightened, we're attached to everything, and therefore it's painful. So we buy a house, and then the house starts falling apart around us, and it's a headache. And then we have a family, and some get run over by trucks, and others fall out of airplanes, and others get shot in wars in faraway places, and others die if we outlive them all. There has to be one last person standing in that family. And by the time you come to the end of your life, you've watched everyone else die, if you're still alive, or they've watched you die. And if your wisdom is not above identification with this or that, therefore all those things cause grief and cause pain. So the first teaching was on the teaching on the 4 ignoble truths. And throughout his life, Buddha taught it again and again, that we should always meditate on the transference and flow and transformation of things. And then it said Buddha's last teaching was death and impermanence, because by dying himself and doing it as a teaching, 3 months before he died, he called all of his students and sent messages to all his students and said, I'll be passing away in Kusinagar in 3 months from now, so anyone who wants to be there, come and we'll all meet there. And he did, and gave his last teaching. The Mahaparivanirvana Sutra it's called, or the Sutra of the Great Passing Away. And dying in a sort of conscious and beautiful way in front of everyone, without no fuss and no unhappiness or no indignities, showed the greatness of enlightenment, even at the last moment, the moment of death. So let's meditate for about 10 minutes. Because we all had a big lunch, we can meditate on falling asleep. And feel the energies. The other day with his friend, I was watching The Curse of the Jade Scorpion, the Woody Allen for hypnosis. I'll hypnotize you all. Now you are getting sleepy. So you were asking, what about the Book of Liberation through Hearing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why the emphasis on hearing?
I think it's because it's part of a set of books by Karma Lingpa. Liberation by means of the hearing and seeing and touching and so on. So it's liberation by hearing in the Bardo. So as you're dying and as you're dead, it's read beside your bed.
Ah, she's listening.
But the idea is that you've practiced that mandala during your lifetime, so it's not just in general. But now in the West, people take, museums around here have what they call Bardo exhibits, in which any paintings or artwork from that mandala are called Bardo paintings, even though it's got nothing to do with the Bardo other than in the Karma Lingpa tradition of explaining the death process by means of the symbolism of the Chitro Mandala. For instance, I was just down in eastern Pennsylvania. Well, it's actually western Pennsylvania, but east of Pittsburgh. A couple of hours, there's a Southern Alleghenies Museum has up a big art exhibit and paintings on the Chitro cycle, the peaceful, wrathful deity cycle of Nyingma, were erroneously marked Bardo paintings, just because they're the same deities as appear in that book. It's only really associated with that book, though, if the arrangement of them is as comes in the book, as opposed to some other arrangement.
Where does Poa fit into this?
Generally, Tibetans will do Poa sometime during their life. They'll do a Poa retreat of about a month. And the idea is it softens the piece of the skull right up here and makes a little itchy spot at the top of the crown that bugs you until you're dead. And you're always like, oh, damn, what's up? Oh, damn. And so then when you die, you go, oh, damn. And you shoot out the top of the skull. Yeah, they've got a funny way of explaining. When you do it, you throw the consciousness up and down the body like this until you make the part of the brain, the skull a little soft, and a blister forms from the energy activity. And then they take a little herb, little flower, and they push the stem in to the blister. And you walk around with this flower sticking out of your head for a few days. I think that would be a good way to create world peace. Make everyone put a little flower sticking out the top of their head, and as long as your flower is there, you get perks. And if the flower comes off, death sentence. Everyone would take very good care of their flower and would be non-violent so as not to disturb or lose their flower. Do you agree with that?
Is that why the Buddha held up a flower when they asked about the nature of reality?
Well, not according to the official story, but you never know. There could have been that hidden meaning. The official story with that is just that the flower most perfectly illustrates the ultimate nature of reality and the conventional nature of reality. Conventionally, a flower is very beautiful, a lotus, but it grows up out of muck and mud. And the lotus pools are always like at the bottom of hills like that, and every animal that shits and pisses and all the dead dogs and chickens and insects all wash into that pool. So it's basically all just, excrement and urine and dead bodies. And coming up out of that comes the lotus, a very beautiful stainless thing. So on the conventional level of reality, it's how we can take Chicago and become a Buddha, a beautiful Buddha. Or New York, or Beijing, or Tibet, or anywhere. Because everywhere we go, we're always stepping on a piece of land where probably a few million beings have died over the past million years. There's not a single spot on the earth that we're not stepping on the bones and dust of a million dead beings. But somehow, walking on top of all that death, we can come up like the lotus, beautiful and free and enlightened. So the meaning is something like that on the conventional level. And on the deeper level, the lotus appears separate from all things, but it's made from water from the earth, and earth from the water because it's mud, and sunlight and starlight and wind blowing in from all over the planet. So it seems separate from all things, but in fact has no separate nature. So both conventionally and in the ultimate sense, it illustrates the two levels of truth in a very direct, immediate way. Looks very solid, but like if you step on a lotus, it just squiggles. In fact, if you sneeze on a lotus, the petals fall off. But yet the lotus looks, the leaves look even more firm and solid than, I don't know, many kinds of firm, solid flowers. But just sneezing on it, then the leaves fall off. Yes.
Can you explain, well, I heard what you said about attachment and suffering as the reason for attachment, but what about grief? Is that like a human, well, opposite for human, but is that a trait that we just go through when someone does pass? I mean, how does that fit in?
Yeah, I mean, all species feel grief. You know, if you watch a mother dog when its baby dies, it doesn't exactly like jump up and down with joy and say, oh, thank goodness that ugly little pup is finally gone. I mean, most species grieve, particularly mothers over their children. It's never, they do everything to protect them. So in a sense, grief is a natural reaction. On the other hand, we have to keep it in a kind of a context, because everyone will die, and therefore we shouldn't be shocked or surprised when something dies. Dying is the closing of one door but the opening of a window. So again, it's not the end, it's just the end of something. In a way, grief is selfish because we're not really sorry that the person's moving on to a higher, better situation, potentially to a higher, better situation. We're actually grieving that we're not going to be able to hang out with them in the immediate sense or way. So in the Buddhist world, people aren't allowed to cry or show grief around a dying person or even a dead person. If you're going to cry and make a scene, you should go far away from the body. Because the Buddhist and the Indian thinking is that the soul hangs around the body for a few days and keeps coming back to it, and kind of until it finds its, finally comes to terms. So you were asking about the Tibetan Book of Liberation by hearing. One reason for hearing is that when it comes back, it can hear the words being said. So usually in the Buddhist world, if someone dies, everyone starts doing mantras and prayers for them and sending them good thoughts and good energy. In the Irish tradition, we hold a wake, where no one's allowed to cry over the person who's dead. Everyone's supposed to think of what good times they had with that person and how lucky they were to spend however long they had, and so on.
And get drunk.
Irish never get drunk. We just try and try and try again, but we fail and try and try and try again. Yeah, so I think, you know, naturally, if a parent loses a child, that's a terrible, terrible grief, because it's kind of unnatural to the instinct. I mean, it's more common for old people to die than young people. So it's a terrible feeling for the parents, and it's a very deep cellular instinct. So even if you're a very high meditator, you'll still feel it, because especially the mother will feel it much more than the father, because it's part of her own body. So it's almost like an amputation of an extra limb kind of thing. But on the other hand, if one is a spiritual practitioner, one has to rise above raw animal instinct. At the same time, we sometimes get an instinct like we'd really like to kill someone. You know, it rises once a year in most human beings, like, oh, I'm so mad I could just kill. If I had a shotgun right now, and we were both on deserted islands, and I had a way of getting off, and no one would ever knew I was here and did it, I would. But we have to rise above that instinct and not do it, and in the same way, not express it in that completeness. I mean, we may, you know, thump the person on the nose or something like that and call it a day. But with someone dying in the same way, we will naturally feel grief. When your parents die, your brother or sister dies, a very dear friend dies, one of your mates, wives, girlfriends, ex-wives, ex-girlfriends. Naturally, your instinct will push you towards great, great grief. But as a spiritual person, you have a kind of responsibility to sort of observe what is instinctual and what is kind of a more conscious processing. And the reality is that all beings will die, and death is the end of everything for everyone. And it's not always a bad thing. It's only bad in a particular context. I mean, naturally, we don't want to lose our friends. We don't want to lose our parents. We don't want to lose our kids. We don't even want to lose our exes. It's always nice to have them around, to have someone to grumble about. But when that does happen and we have that instinctual grief kicks in, then I think in the Mahamudra tradition we would look at the flow of energy and the flow of consciousness and try to notice the sort of the radiance, which is the consciousness, and the flow of energy, which is the experience of the emotion, and to balance those two in a certain way, and to turn the grief towards compassion and love and caring, to think of the person and send them thoughts of love and thoughts of caring. Often when people die in the Tibetan and Asian Buddhist traditions, they have monks come to the house and do long chantings of rituals and prayers and stuff like that, and it's a way of, I think, again, channeling that energy. But one can oneself do many mantras. Many people, when their teachers die, or for students, for a teacher, when their students die, naturally it's a great loss. And they do many mantras together as a kind of a wish that they'll connect again in future lives and continue kind of enlightenment unfoldments. Yeah.
Will the Lama always know when the student is dying, whether they hear any word of it, you know, in material, I mean, so if they don't get an email, they know that the student is dying just because of the connection that they have with the student?
Yeah, it's hard to say if it always happens with every teacher, because you have a lot of, teachers on various levels of sensitivity and so on. So they may or may not always be informed about it or sense it or feel it. Maybe it's just they wake up feeling a little bit good, like, oh, thank goodness, one less student. Sort of like a yak in which one of the bricks that it was carrying has fallen off.
So maybe for that reason, it's good to have several teachers. So
yeah.
Two men.
That way they all get a little bit of relief.
Okay, so when we die and we are entering the Bardo and we don't know what to do, in spite of the teachings, can we scream Lama Glen and we'll show up in hell?
Yeah, that would definitely work. That's a money-back guarantee. I mean, all the texts do state that calling the name of your teacher is a very powerful method. And I don't think it's got anything to do with the qualification of the teacher, but dealing with death, your own death, and spiritual awareness and feelings of strength and competence, those are very important qualities. Like I think in the West, I've often heard people say they hope they'll die in their sleep, painlessly, and so on. In the Buddhist world, you'll never ever see that in a Buddhist text as a prayer. May I die unconsciously in my sleep. The idea is just the opposite, that we'd like to die sitting up in meditation or sitting up in our bed, or even if we're stretched out, fully awake and fully aware of the process. And really facing death straight on, like we're going to be doing paragliding or, taking a high dive or something like that, to be fully aware. It's like, well, to put it in a boxing metaphor, it's like going into the ring. You want to be in your best shape possible and your best condition possible, because what happens when you go in the Bardo, in the Buddhist belief or Buddhist thinking or Buddhist scheme of things, is that the more together you are, the better you're going to do. And if you can every day practice meditation and notice the energy transferences and transformations, and do it when you go to sleep at night, and become accustomed to working in the dream state where you've got this very subtle energy combined with a mind which is somewhat, the conceptual side is very limited in its power to exercise control. If you can enter death with some of those qualities matured and cultivated and aware, then it gives you a super edge. It's like a kid who goes to preschool before going to kindergarten and then goes to grade 1 like 10 steps up of everyone else has got a good chance of at least succeeding in grade 1. They may fall apart after that because of over-institutionalization. So the metaphor only goes as far as the end of grade 1. But if we have that spiritual awareness, self-awareness, and it really means awareness of energy transformations, of our bodily energies, how they transform when we go through various processes. And so that nothing that arises just pops up out of nowhere. As it's arising, we're aware of the unfolding. Now, often tantric literature also speaks about our romantic life and our sort of sexuality as being one of the great teachers, because again, in romance and in sexuality, we have that same kind of very radical energy transformations very quickly. And as the energies transform, the emotions transform, and the mental quality of consciousness, or the vibrational frequency of consciousness, transforms. So again, just like we can meditate sitting down and we can meditate in the dream state. And meditate here really means just being self-aware, cultivating awareness of processes. All of that contributes to us. The long and short being, the better lover you are, the better dyer you are. And the better Bardo body navigator. Yes, sorry.
Question I don't think I've ever heard addressed in the Buddhist teachings is what happens to a suicide?
So the question, what happens to suicide? Well,
do they go through the same?
Yes. I mean, I don't think many texts address suicide in a very direct way, other than to discourage it, because I think the emphasis in the Buddhist world is that whatever hardships you have are good training grounds for you. And therefore, if you have hardships, that suicide is completely the wrong way to face them. And you're just basically running from them. And so you're putting off something that is a karmic situation that sooner or later you're going to have to face. And so because you've got that hardship now, you might as well take advantage of it. It's different. You can't cultivate hardships. They're very rare treasures in human life. 90% of our life is very, very good, and only 10% is hardship, at most. And so when you get a few here and there, they're like golden opportunities. So texts sort of speak in that kind of language. Like, for instance, Sankappa and the 6 yogas, when it's talking about Poa, when you train in this power to throw consciousness out of the body and, in fact, to sever the life, close the life canal behind you, so that essentially you're committing a kind of a spiritual suicide just by projecting yourself out of your body. He says this should never be done in order to escape illness or pain or difficult circumstance, because it's equivalent to killing a deity, because our body, killing a Buddha, because our body is like a temple, and by destroying it, it's like we're killing a Buddha or killing a sacred being or a divine being. But that said, because literature is all written to discourage it, Therefore, it's largely, I think, metaphoric in meaning. That is, its purpose is to discourage people from suicide. So I don't think there's much what we can take from it that we could say is true in a kind of a more literal sense. What is true is that it's very unfortunate that people find themselves so deeply enmeshed in depression and grief or pain and sorrow, and they can't see any other solution. So it's certainly a heart-rending situation. Even an enemy committing suicide in Buddhism, we think, is a cause of great empathy or sympathy. But nonetheless, it does happen, and when it happens, and in the Buddhist world, all the friends and all the relatives will all do mantras and send them good wishes and say, better luck next time. I mean, there's really nothing we can do, and many people, I don't know how many, but 1 in 100, 1 in 200, 1 in 300 families will have some story of someone like that who was a family member or a good friend or someone close. And there's really nothing that one can do oneself other than to help people try to stay cheerful and hopeful. I think that's one reason why in the Buddhist tradition there's this great emphasis on beginning your day by meditating on how precious an opportunity it is to be human, by trying to get people to understand that your joy is something you can consciously cultivate, your inner peace and joy, that it doesn't depend on externals as much as we think it does, or we tend to think it does. That our inner peace and joy and happiness, if we consider those things as very, very important, they become strong in us. And the idea that most emotions are habits, being angersome is a habit, and if you just stop allowing yourself to become angersome, your body mechanism that triggers anger becomes less triggered, and you produce less angersome chemicals. And if you allow yourself to become angersome more than you become, your body becomes habituated to releasing that kind of poisonous energy in your body, or poisonous chemistry. I think on a very deep level, those kind of instincts have that kind of, instinctual behavior has a purpose. I mean, we become angersome or fearful when there's some great traumatic event and we need a super burst of energy, and the adrenaline's throwing, and the pancreas and so on. We get a whole infusion of body chemistry to give us a fight or flight super surge of energy. So it has a purposeful foundation, but unfortunately, when it's taken outside the arena of its purposefulness, and it's just we just become like angersome people, then everything makes us angry. Snow on the driveway and a rainy day and someone at the office and people in traffic cutting us off and everything. Then every time that energy comes up, the adrenals throw that chemistry into the body, and then the mind is riding on that chemistry. It's influenced by the chemistry, by nature, or by instinct. So it's basically the body throwing negativity into the mind, and the mind throwing negativity into the body, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Then there's lots of people who become addicted to it. The sort of the pleasurable factor of adrenaline, that feeling of power you get from it, and feeling angry at someone gives you kind of purpose and meaning and focus and so on. So in the Enlightenment tradition, we think that to cut those cycles, and to always remind yourself, actually, I own my mind, I own my thoughts, I own my feelings. Someone else may own the building I live in, and they may own the streets I drive on, and they may own the schools I go to or went to or will go to. The one thing I own is my own mind, my own emotions, my own spirit, my own soul. And it's the one thing that no one can touch if I don't give it to them, if I don't surrender that power to them. Yes, Das.
Some of the theosophical literature talks about a time at the moment of death where you sort of have a retrospective vision of your whole life. Is there anything like that in the Tibetan?
It's very often said, yeah. And I think it's that's kind of a universal belief as well, that often close to the moment of death you kind of have a review of your whole life. I think as part of the energy withdrawing from the body, when the so-called soglung, the life-supporting energy withdraws, and to a large extent it activates or carries or supports the memories we've accumulated during our lifetime. And to a certain extent it's kind of like a gathering of that baggage and bringing it into our carrying case.
Well, how would that relate to these 8 stages of dissolution? I mean, when would that happen?
I think it would probably happen probably when the one they call the air energy withdrawing, because that's air here means lung, so it would be something, one of those kind of processes, one of those phases of processing. Yes.
In the book you talked about being able to go from one life immediately into another and bypass Bardo. For those people who don't bypass Bardo, is there a length of time that you stay in Bardo?
Well, you know, this number 7 times 7 comes up in all the Indian literature and Abhidharma literature and Buddhist literature. And they take them as days, but in reality they're these 7 things, the 4 elements and the 3 conceptual mind states. So it's actually 7 phases. But because we don't know how long a phase is measuring, there's no real measuring stick, there's no like Bardo clock. Therefore they're kind of put as human days for human purposes. So we think of them in that kind of a way, and I think you'll find some literalists who may think they actually mean human days. But there's nothing in the esoteric literature to support that. And in fact, anyone can come out of the Bardo at any time. It's said people who are very positive or negative, or very negative, Bardo will just last a few moments or a few hours, and they'll immediately link. But it's people who haven't digested their life much and are kind of waffling, the waffle fence sitter types. They can't figure out, do I wear a white hat or do I wear a black hat? And so their karmas are very mixed. So those people, when they get in the Bardo, sorting out their energies takes a long time. But people who did a lot of meditation, a lot of spiritual practice, or people who just put most of their life into thinking about doing good works, that'll still be a strong quality. So it'll be a strong driving force. So Buddhist literature talks like that. And for others, then you can go through, and if you don't get it in the first 7 days, you die. Your Bardo body dies, and you're reborn with another Bardo body, which is a little different. A little less like your vision of your body of this life. It starts to lose some of the features of the body of this life, and slowly starts to acquire some more features of where you're going towards. And then after another 7 cycles, if you still don't get it, another one dies and another one starts. At the end of 7 times 7 cycles, and there's not enough energy left to support that kind of a subtle energy body. So then you see 2 people making love, and then you think, oh, I'm going to be a male. Who is this guy with the woman of my dreams? And you get very, very angry. And the anger kills you. Or if you're destined to become a woman, then you look at the guy and think, wow, what a great guy. Who is that wench? And the anger overwhelms you and kills your Bardo body. The literature says like that. For that reason, in tantric practice, we see ourselves as wrathful and lustful deities, because these two instincts, to kill and to make love, are the two deepest driving instincts of the human psyche, not only of humans, but of all living beings. Therefore, Tantra is often said to be a fast path, because we utilize those two forces which in ordinary spirituality we kind of try to avoid. Like Sutra Buddhism, we say, don't be violent, be patient, and that sort of control your sexual energies to a kind of a moderate level, middle way level. But in Tantra, the sexual energies are used in a very direct way in the visualizations of the male-female deities, as well as in other ways, and as is the instinct to violence. Although you're not allowed to go punching people up. You can just see yourself punching them up. Something like that. Yes?
Question about, I'm curious about cremation and what effect that has on the entity dying. If
Right.
it's done too soon, and what is that time frame? What is the best length of time to do it?
And Tibetans always, and Buddhists always think 3 days. They like to keep the body for 3 days without anyone touching it. No formaldehyde and that sort of stuff for 3 days. But it's not really legal in the West. It's a state-by-state thing. And so you're stuck with having to do whatever the state regulates, basically, unless you get special permission in some way. Some countries are more open towards it. I used to be on the board of advisors of an organization in England called the Dying Institute. I think they changed their name to like the Natural Death Movement or something like that. But basically trying to get people permission to die in very natural ways, and also to be buried in natural ways. And I think, with the increase of human population, it's obviously been necessary to regulate a little bit more. In America, people were sort of forced to regulate, I think, because it's a country of immigrants, and you had all of these different traditions. And so some of them were, okay with the others, and others were okay with some, but not others, and so on. And so I think a lot more regulation happened over here than, say, happened in Europe. So over here, many states, for instance, you have to remove the body from the house within a few hours of the passing, and it has to be formaldehyded within certain hours, or frozen and stuff like that. So I think, Buddhists wouldn't be too happy with that, but on the other hand, if you're unfortunate enough to die in such a land with such barbaric practices, what were you doing there in the first place? I think the idea in Buddhism is that anyway, just so long as you have everyone around him has the deceased person has a positive attitude, it's probably okay. Yes.
Yeah, there are green, they call it green, of course, it's a popular, green burials,
green burials,
I think it's green burial, but they won't do anything to the body. Body stays at home.
Yeah, again, it is a state-by-state situation, so there's no federal jurisdiction. And I'm sure states like Montana and probably Texas, I bet are a lot more liberal than, say, states like Ohio, Pennsylvania. I mean, I don't know all of the different states. I was at one death in Pennsylvania, and the rule there was that the body should be removed from the house within 3 hours of notification of the time of death. In other words, when the attending nurse or doctor declared the person dead, that was supposed to be removed. I think it was 3 hours, something like 2 to 4 hours, but I think it was 3. But usually the workers are much more, much more sympathetic and flexible. I mean, they kind of see the rule as a... So in this case, when the nurse came, she said, well, the best I can do is sit here for 2 hours and give an extra 2 hours. And then I'll have to, within 2 hours, do it. Otherwise, the police could say, why didn't you call the nurse if he was dying? And it could become a legal issue. But she said, because I know everyone in the family well, and then I can wait 2 hours, but if the body gets down at the morgue like stinking to high heaven, there could be complaints that it wasn't done quickly enough, and so I can't risk more than that. But I mean, she was a very, very kind person and very considerate. Similarly, I was at the death, I sort of helped with the death of a mother of a friend in California once. It was a little bit similar when she started dying, and when the emergency people came, she was just died a few minutes before they got there. But she was very, very old. She was 91 or something, so they weren't actually coming to save her, although, there was always that long off chance that it could happen, but at her age, not a lot. But when they arrived and we requested, is it possible to leave the body for a few hours? And the policeman said, well, it's obviously a very natural thing here. There was no foul play. We don't need to do any special effort. And so what we can do is phone in the report and just say to them, it's not a priority removal. And so then that means they're not bound by whatever is a California law, which again wasn't much different. It was something like 3 hours. And so then the fellow phoned up after a couple of hours, and he said, well, okay, I'm sort of running around picking up bodies today, and what time do you want me to come by for yours? If you want to delay it a little bit, it's okay. I mean, he'd said it in a kind, compassionate, caring way to facilitate the wishes of the family, not to make light of it or anything like that, but in order to show that he, cared for them, was trying to fulfill their wishes while still trying to honor the law to some extent, because the problem is people doing that work don't make the laws. They're just to some extent bound by them. Yes?
I have a couple of questions. Well, the most important one I'll give you first. There is that chance, right, at death to merge with the light, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
And then you would avoid the Bardo and you could have instant enlightenment. Is that true?
You said a couple of questions.
Well, that's one of the questions. And then the other part of that component would be, and then is doing meditation and just developing a clear light consciousness the best way to make that happen? Mm-hmm. And then why do some lamas put a lot of stock in opening the opening?
Okay.
This?
So tying it into the POA question, as I mentioned earlier, many people will do this practice where you sort of prepare the death, the optimal death passage. And the belief in the tantric literature is if you leave through the Brahma aperture, then that's the maximally positive exit. Sort of like, coming into a movie theater. If you come in through the door right near your seat, it's a lot easier than coming in by some remote door where you've got to walk around a lot, something like that. They actually think too that whatever aperture you leave through, it's a different kind of energy. And so some energies are more clear and some are more confused and so on. So leaving by the Brahma aperture is very important in terms of having maximum conscious awareness at the time of entering the Bardo. So they cultivate that practice and do a retreat on it, and then if you die early, because nobody knows when they're going to die, so if it's tomorrow or next week or next month, you've sort of got that going for you as a kind of a plan B. Now plan A is to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime, but if you don't do that, instead of becoming great like a Glenn Mullin, you just become like a, I don't know, Al Gore. Then at the time, but even in his case, he didn't even do the POA training, so he doesn't even have Plan B. So then he's only got Plan C, which is rely on his good karma. In his case, the clear light yoga at the time of death, we train in that during the daytime by cultivating clear light awareness. And then when we achieve or generate clear light awareness in meditation, when the mind moves from that clear light awareness, that's a little bit like moving into a dream in sleep, or it's a little bit like generating a Bardo body after death. And so then we pull back from that movement of the mind in clear light awareness when meditating and pull back to clear light itself. In dream yoga, we generate the dream, and when the dream arises, we go to sleep in the clear light of the moment of sleep, and the dream arises after the energies move. We try to still the energies in dream and move back to clear light of sleep, clear light consciousness. If we can be effective of that, then at the time of death, if even by then we haven't achieved enlightenment, or as the seventh Dalai Lama puts it in a poem, if you're as stupid as a goat and at the time of death still haven't become a Buddha, then you can apply that practice. And so at the time then the clear light of moment of death arises, and so Tsongkhapa points out it shouldn't be called the clear light of the moment of death. It should be called clear light in the Bardo, because what happens is that the clear light of the moment of death comes. And if you did your sadhana practice well, and your completion stage practice well, and your clear light practice well, and transforming dream body into Sambhogakaya body, and therefore at the time of going into the Bardo, you'll recognize the Bardo as Bardo. And recognizing it as such will transform the energies, and like a fish swimming upstream will push the energies in reverse back to clear light of the moment of death. So, and at that second experience of the clear light of the moment of death, you'll go, aha, I got it. And ba-boom, you become a Buddha. So it's definitely a plan B. But if you have a mature practice of the tantric yogas, then it's easily accomplished, is the way it's put in the texts. The downside is you get one crack at it, and if you're better than you think, no, if you're not as good as you think, you're washed downstream.
That's lucid dreaming, isn't it, in a way? What you're speaking on in a way?
Yeah, so dream yoga is considered the fertile ground in which to train in that practice as a kind of a plan B practice. The plan A practice for dream yoga is by releasing the clairvoyant powers and learning to see how energy processes transform consciousness. Then sleeping and dreaming in a spiritual way makes daytime practice 100 times more beneficial. And so then daytime practice becomes 100 times more beneficial, and dream time or sleep time experience becomes 100 times more beneficial. So it's like it's like adding an extra couple of zeros to the check that you write to me. This is the jade scorpion, you are hypnotized. You are under the Madagascar. Constantinople. But the idea is that because all states are interconnected, when we create a more integrated practice, our life becomes more powerful. That is kind of a synergistic process. If you just do 10 minutes of meditation or 2 hours of meditation or however long, once or twice a day or 4 times a day, that's one thing. If you can combine that with between meditation sessions as something very powerful, that improves it. And if you can go beyond that to the time you go to bed to the time you wake up, you can add a couple of extra zeros to the power of those moments or the spiritual significance of those moments, the synergy all ties everything together. Otherwise, you end up like one of those meditators who sits and meditates and looks very spiritual and religious, and then they get off their meditation cushion and running around, the smallest thing gets on their nerves and throws them into a, was it fizzy? Is that the word? Tizzy. Throws them into a tizzy. I have to learn these Americanisms. Yeah?
Well, I have a comment on that. I mean, they always say...
A tizzy?
No. Well, being in a tizzy. It relates to being in a tizzy.
Okay.
You know, in Tantra, they always say, be positive 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was reading something in the second Dalai Lama book.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said was, learn to transcend negativity, to transform negativity,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is, for me, a more effective way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Who translated that book? Great translation, great translation. Yeah, I'm not sure which exact poem that's in, but if it's in terms of lojong, then when the lojong, whatever negativities come, as I said earlier, to try to greet them like friends and transform them just merely by seeing how that exercise is beneficial for you, the exercise with that difficulty. Otherwise, in the tantric sense, it just means if you feel anger, rather than objectify the anger, in other words, look at the object which is making you angry, you try to feel the energy of the anger and just rest or lean into that energy. And within the energy of anger, there's a radiance. All energy has a radiance, just like fire has light. And so you try to lean into the anger, feel the radiance of the anger, and it becomes mirror-like wisdom. I think the sort of linguistic kind of goes like that. And with all, so in Tantra, transforming negativities has that sense. In Sutra, well, with Tibetans, it'll be connected with lojong, and therefore it means whatever negativities there means difficulties and negative experiences or difficult experiences. So in Sutra, the word's usually like kien nyen, which means something like bad circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important distinction for a practitioner, a lay practitioner, because we're constantly, possibly, some of us, finding ourselves in, you know, having negative manifestations of consciousness every so often. And so, you know, if you don't...
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
It must be something that happens only to non-Irish people.
Yes. But you know, because if you look at it the other way, be positive 24 hours a day, then you always have to be somewhere, there's a shadow in your mind saying, I can't, I don't measure up, that's not happening. Whereas if you look at it this way, you're way more focused in the moment.
Yeah, but when you say be positive 24 hours a day, it doesn't actually mean you will be positive 24 hours a day. It means that whatever arises, you try to rest relaxedly and lucidly within that. I mean, we don't have any control over what goes on around us, and the first moment of anything, the instinct can be very violent. But on the other hand, as a spiritual, I mean, the only two ways we practice, as I've said many times, and as is said in all the Buddhist texts, Trempa Tung Sheshen, through mindfulness of the method and awareness of what's actually happening. Unless we can put what's actually happening together with the effective method, then we lose it. We're not doing anything. We're just basically a pawn to the game that arises. And living in the age of the five darkness, the Kali Yuga, where there's greed and anger and violence and kind of a lot of negativity everywhere in the world. We're always going to be encountering it. And unless we can put together mindfulness of our methodology with awareness of the actual flow of what's happening physically, emotionally, and mentally or spiritually in our life, then essentially we just become a pawn in someone else's game rather than a free individual. So I think in Buddhism, freedom is really defined as the ability in your own mind never to be overpowered by someone else's game. Your ability always to be able to retain your own parameters or your own inner peace and joy, regardless of whatever anyone else does around you. That's freedom. Without that, your freedom is always limited by whatever conditions are around you. And in the ordinary world, that means you're always going to be in someone else's basket, basically, and prey to their designs and their karma. Which really means you're part of the world's problems rather than part of the world's solutions. The minute you can claim your own inner independence, then you become part of the solution of the world. And someone else is in a bad mood and they come along. If it doesn't affect you, it actually helps them. If it does affect you, it hurts them. It hurts you, it hurts them. So transforming negativities in Sutra, we say do it by seeing whatever comes as kind of a friend, and that there's something you can learn from it. Like someone asking me a dumb question like that. I can learn to be patient with dumb questions. Just teasing, my dear. It was a brilliant question. I'm just teasing, just teasing. Okay, let's conclude by doing some Om Mani Pamehong Mantras. In the generally in Tibetan world, this mantra Om Mani Pamehong is considered to be the best way to benefit anyone dying or dead in Bardo looking for rebirth. Because the meaning of Mani Padme is compassion, wisdom. So actually recently when I was, what city was I in? Okay. And I'm giving a talk in a university to a continuing education group. And it was related to the subject of death and dying and caring for people's transiting and transitioning. But I gave them the choice of doing the mantra in Sanskrit with correct pronunciation, in Sanskrit with corrupted Tibetan pronunciation. Like instead of Om Mani Padme Hung, Om Mani Padme Hung. Or doing it in English, like Om Compassion Wisdom Hung, Om Compassion Wisdom Hung. They all went for the English, Om Compassion Wisdom Hung, Om Compassion Wisdom Hung. Or we can do it like with the metaphoric meaning, Om Jewel Lotus Hung, Om Jewel Lotus Hung. But let's do Compassion Wisdom Hung for a little while. We'll do 21 of them. And we think anyone who's died that we know in the last year or two, send them positive energy. Or anyone who's like right on their last legs and gulping their last breaths of air on the planet now, even if we don't know them, we send them some positive energy. Om Compassion Wisdom Hung, 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 Om Compassion Wisdom wisdom hum. Om compassion, wisdom hum. Om compassion, wisdom hum. Then we can do it a metaphoric way. Om jewel lotus hum. 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 And last we can do it in for a third time we'll do it in Sanskrit, but with the Tibetan corrupted translation. Pronunciation. Om mani padme hum. 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 And then finally do it in the proper Sanskrit pronunciation. Om mani padme hum. 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 Oops, I did one with corrupted Tibetan. We have to start again. Tsongkhapa's great student, Kadubche, says, even if you're doing 100,000, if you pass gas or mispronounce one, you should start again from one. Om mani padme hum. 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 These 6 mantras, 6-syllable mantras, are very commonly done for deceased people or dying people, rather than Tibetan Book of the Dead or the very complicated practices, which are usually only read for those people who are advanced practitioners who have done that specific practice for much of their life. Generally, we think Om Mani Padme Hum, that those sounds are the sounds of the 6 realms of the world. God realm and the Azora or Titan world, the human world, the animal world, and the ghost world, and the hell being world. So as we do the mantras for someone dying, we close the gates to rebirth in the 6 worlds of samsara. And the energy of compassion and wisdom causes them to turn their mind to enlightenment and thus evolve even beyond the highest of the heavens into the world of enlightenment itself. Well, I'd like to thank everyone very much for coming today and joining in the workshop. It's a great honor for me to be able to speak on the Dharma with you, and a great pleasure to be able to tell you some Irish Buddhist Dharma Tibetan Irish jokes. It's important when we finish Dharma practice, we think that anything beneficial we got out of it, that we may use that to achieve enlightenment more quickly in order to be of greater benefit to all living beings. We should also dedicate our whatever goodness comes from our endeavors to the long lives of the great teachers and the great masters. And in general, that natural disasters and human-made disasters and conflicts and so forth, by the flow of positive energy, can be transformed. And essentially those negative energies can all be released. In particular, I think, to make many positive thoughts for the long life of the Dalai Lama. He's one of the great teachers on the planet today, and one of sort of the great light bearers, so that his work will continue and meet with great success for bringing happiness and harmony to our collective family on this little planet. Thank you so much.